Hey everybody, quick interjection before you get into the actual episode. I'm sure longtime listeners of the show have seen the runtime length for this episode and thought to themselves, Ginger, what the hell have you done, man? And if you're new to the show, welcome to the show. Happy to have you here. We do news and lore about Pillars of Eternity and Avowed that share the same universe known as Eora. This entire episode is going to be about Avowed and the news we've seen at Gamescom and recent articles put out from people who have actually played a demo of the game hands-on. I didn't do an episode last week because there was just way too much news to cover over the weekend to be able to go through it and record. I have gone through everything at least 2 times over now, and I've kind of put it all onto one document page, and I just kind of go through it all bit by bit, and I let you know on this episode the stuff that I think is worth mentioning that might be interesting to some people. Some of it won't be. I do a long segment on the abilities that we see, which some people will want to be able to theory craft their characters they'll build in Avowed. Some people won't like it necessarily, but whatever. It's just all in there. The thing I need you to know, though, before we actually get the episode started, is that I will not be doing an episode next week. This is partly because I did a nearly 2-hour episode this week, but also because I recognize that some people out there are listening. You have to budget your podcast time because you listen to a lot of podcasts, and I know this firsthand for some of you that you actually do this, and a 2-hour episode of my show kind of like will eat into time that you might listen to other shows, and I don't want that to be something that happens. So I'm not going to do an episode next week so that I can allow you listeners to be able to listen to this entire episode at your own leisure throughout the next 2 weeks. As well, I kind of want a week off to spend time with my family, but I don't need to talk about that here. So no episode next week. This is going to be a long one. I go through everything, the gameplay demo, all of the articles, and I take out the useful, interesting parts that I think are worth mentioning, the things that get repeated over and over again. That's kind of what I do. Thanks everyone for today's episode. If you're a first-time listener, sorry, this is the first one that you're listening to because it's a slog, but maybe you'll find it interesting. Maybe this is your thing. Some of you might be disappointed that I don't do this kind of stuff in the future. Also, I start off on a weird energy. You'll understand in a second. Okay, anyways, bye guys.
Welcome to the world of Eora, a news and lore podcast about Pillars of Eternity and Avowed, as created by Obsidian Entertainment. I'm your host, Eric, aka Gingerino. Thank you all for listening. Let's get into today's lore.
Hello nerds and welcome to the show. If you're new to this program, I probably shouldn't have called you all nerds right off the start. Man, it's some negative energy. But let's be honest. If you're listening to this, you're probably a nerd. I'm just saying. And almost certainly, this is a lore program about Pillars of Eternity and Avowed, if you are, in fact, new. If you're a longtime listener, I'm sure you're recognizing some weird energy that I got today. It's just one of those days, and it's awesome. We have a lot to talk about on today's episode, so if you are new to the show, welcome to the show. This is the World of Eora, where we talk about the lore for Pillars of Eternity and Avowed, and today it's mostly going to be news, but we are going to dive into some of the lore that we specifically see in a lot of the gameplay demos that we've been having recently. But yeah, today is mostly going to be a news-related episode, which, if you've been paying attention to any of the news, is not going to be very surprising. We learned a lot about Avowed. We've got to see a ton about the game of Avowed and what it's going to look like and play like and be like, and a lot of it's very exciting. I have finally chewed through all of the content I possibly can, and I'm sure there's even more being made right now as I'm recording this. I'm betting articles are being written, videos are being edited, podcasts are being put together of people's thoughts and other people's experiences playing the actual game at Gamescom 2024 from a demo that was actually set up by the team at Obsidian. So a lot to cover today. Let's just dive straight into the news.
I'm curious. What exactly did you find there?
It's weird doing a news segment after that transition, but I don't have anything else I can really tell you. That we just got a lot of news to cover. For those who are lore nerds and they're looking for the lore, there's going to be some lore sprinkled in throughout this news. Yeah, I'm going to be talking about the gameplay demo, and there's some journal entries that we see in there, and I have transcripts for those that I will read out on this section as well. So I'm kind of hybridizing the two together. So let's summarize what we've seen so far. For posterity's sake, I am recording this on Monday, August 26th, mid-afternoon in my local area, but that's the day I'm recording this on. So if there's any news that's come out after that day, it might not be in today's episode unless I get time to come in and edit it in. But we have a lot to talk about today about the game of Avowed, which if you don't know, then surprised to have you here, but that's fine. Welcome to the show anyways. Avowed is a game that is coming out developed by Obsidian Entertainment, well known for Fallout New Vegas, Pillars of Eternity, The Outer Worlds, Pentiment, Grounded, a whole schwack, one metric schwack of games to be precise. And Avowed is kind of the big game that's coming out next year in February. Now, at Gamescom 2024, they had gameplay demos set up for people to play, and a lot of people gave their first-hand experiences and wrote articles online, and there was also a lot of press about Avowed coming out at the time. So we have some things to go over. There is an article on Xbox Wire that talks about two different approaches to the gameplay. There's an interview with Carrie Patel at Gamescom from IGN that talks a little bit about the endings. As well, we got a screenshot of, well, not a screenshot, we got a photograph. I'm starting to call real-life photographs screenshots now. How far down this rabbit hole am I going to go? But we got an actual photograph of the Avowed theater that was presented at Gamescom, and there's some interesting tidbits there. There's a Eurogamer article, there's an IGN review, a Games Radar review, there is a Gamertag radio podcast that talks about some stuff, digital trends. A guy named Mikey Dowling on X posted some HUD and UI stuff. There's the Iron Lords podcast, Video Game Chronicles, the gameplay demo itself, as well as numerous people's actual experiences, such as a guy named Bruce Green, who posted a lot about his experience. Some various screenshots and some more articles. We're not going to talk about all of them because there's a lot of information that gets repeated unnecessarily, but we're going to kind of go through some of the stuff I've mentioned today. So first and foremost, let's start off with the Xbox Wire article, which primarily shows how Avowed can be played in multiple ways, and they highlight two separate ways of doing that through these two individuals, one named Daniel and one named Mike. They both took different approaches to playing the game. One of them played more of a scout/ranger/rogue character, and the other one played more of a fighter barbarian style. And in reading this article, we can really see firsthand some differences the way you can approach the actual combat, as well as how you can approach the narratives. They also mention backgrounds in here as well. So we have learned, I think there's 5 backgrounds in the game, that we learned this from multiple sources. There's 5 or 6. And I think we have now mapped out what the 5 are. There seems to be Noble Scion, Vanguard Scout, Arcane Scholar, War Hero, and Hunter. So those are the 5 backgrounds that you can choose for your character in character creation. Personally, I was kind of hoping for a little bit more, but I'm starting to recognize that when you combine these with attributes and dialogue checks, that this can probably get quite complicated. As well, these 5 backgrounds kind of, I think, span a lot of different styles of play. But yeah, Noble Scion, Vanguard Scout, Arcane Scholar, War Hero, and Hunter seem to be the 5 backgrounds that you can choose for your player character in Avowed during character creation. Myself, I'm almost certainly going to pick Arcane Scholar, just because I want to have those options to talk about some of that more deep and esoteric lore. I do like the idea of the other backgrounds just to see what kind of context they have and what options they'll give, but I think I'm going to want to have more opportunities for lore, so Arcane Scholar seems to be where I'm going to go with. Throughout all these sources, not just the Xbox Wire article we're talking about, we really do learn that this is a colorful game, very vibrant, has a wide palette, and it is definitely not a grim, dark game. So that's something that we've kind of already known, but it's to see it very universally acclaimed, and a lot of people have been remarking on it. Like, it was stark, at least compared to their expectations on what they thought they were going to see. So it's a very colorful game, very vibrant, and me personally, I kind of like that. Not that I have anything against grim, dark fantasy, but I think I don't experience a lot of like really vibrant fantasy. So I'm personally excited for that. I wouldn't have hated a grim, dark either. That's just kind of where I would lean. In a later source, one of the podcasts, or I think even both of the podcasts, the Gamertag one and the Iron Lords, but specifically the Iron Lords, they bring up the idea of unique items, and I can mention a few here that we hear about from just this little bit of a playthrough. There is a bow called the Long Touch. That's what the Ranger archetype that they had for the gameplay demo had. That was a unique bow. There is a unique pistol that we don't know the name of that has shock damage. And then the Barbarian had 2 weapons. One was called Drawn in Winter, which I talked about on my previous episode to this one, as well as another weapon called 7 Strings. Now, there is apparently way more than just that as well. If you go into the gameplay demo itself, you'll actually get to see one of the actual weapons that you can loot from the mini boss in that area, or I guess the boss of that quest. And so there is apparently a lot of unique weapons in the game, which personally speaking, I'm very excited about. That's kind of where I get a lot of that unique flavor and that unique style of like who gets what weapon and what I stick with for the rest of playthrough. And I'm hoping that those can be upgraded as well. I hope that it's not just the non-unique weapons that can be upgraded. I don't see why that wouldn't happen, but I could see why they might lock certain weapons at certain levels. Who knows? We learned about some abilities in the Xbox Wire article. The only one that stood out to me as brand new, or at least one I haven't heard of in Avowed yet, is the Barbaric Shout, which seems to be an area of effect thing to just push back enemies, which is something I think I will utilize even if I am planning on playing a gun mage of sorts. As well, as is remarked by many people in all of these different sources, Kai, which was the companion featured in the gameplay demo at Gamescom, is voiced by Brandon Keener, who is well known as playing Garrus Vicarian in Mass Effect series, which I coincidentally happen to be playing right now. And so it's really nice to see everyone's positive reaction to that. It's such an iconic voice within the RPG corner of the games industry. So that's the Xbox Wire article. It's a really interesting read. If you're wanting to read and not watch or not listen, if you're wanting to specifically read 2 different accounts side by side on how they approached the same quest, this is a really good way to do that. They're both editors at Xbox Wire, but they both had very good ways of presenting the way they approached this particular quest, which would be the Dawn Treader quest that we saw in the gameplay demo. Next up, we have an IGN interview with Carrie Patel at Gamescom. This is the one where people heard about the endings slides being in the double digits, but there were some other things that were mentioned as well, such as the color and vibrancy of the game, which was largely driven by apparently Matt Hansen, the art director, and what he valued, especially coming from Deadfire. The number of ending slides that are at the end of Avowed are in the double digits. Matt Hansen as well in the Iron Lords podcast mentions that there are at least 50 slides for the end of the game. That doesn't mean that there are 50 endings in particular. That just means so far there are at least 50 slides in total. If you've ever played an Obsidian game, you'll be familiar with how at the end of their games they typically have a slideshow of sorts, which show kind of what happened as the result of your choices within the world after the game ends. And it can be more than just what happened to the main story. It can also be there can be slides that have to do with each individual companion and what happens to them in their story moving forward. And in this game of Avowed, it also seems that there's going to be ending slides that are featuring the areas that we go to. So the multiple biomes and open zones that we go into, there are narratives going on there, and the choices we make will impact those areas moving forward. So those things will get slides. I'm sure some important side quests will also have their unique slides for the end of the game, etc., etc. So there are a lot of slides at the end of the game. So if you're getting close to the end of the game when Avowed does release, and you think, oh man, I want to finish this game, I'm supposed to go to bed, I'll just finish the game, do keep in mind that there's going to be probably some level of an extensive slideshow at the end of this, which personally I find charming and I'm looking forward to. I like how when a game ends and then there's a slideshow in the sense that it's like, okay, the game is over, your part in this story is now over, let's just now review what has happened, what choices you made, and how that impacts the world, and then the game can actually just end right there and then. The game is built to be replayable, at least they have that in mind, and they kind of mention that in this interview with Carrie Patel, that they had the idea of replayability in mind, and you can see this demonstrated in the actual gameplay demo, where they show off how you can make different comments, you can approach things from a different way. You'll also have different backgrounds, so you can play the game with a different background. You can be a dick, you can be a hero, you can be somewhere in the middle. And so there definitely is going to be a level of replayability to it, which is going to be all the better for a lot of us who want to experience what Avowed fully has to offer. I know I don't replay a lot of games, but I tend to really wring out the content in one playthrough. Like, there has been times where I will make a manual save at the start of a side quest, I'll play through the side quest once, make a save file at the end of that, and then I will reload my previous save to replay a side quest over and over again, but making different choices to see how those side quests can go. I know that's kind of cheesing it a little bit, but that's just how I manage my time in games that are very big. because I know I'm not going to replay games a ton. I've always thought that I'm a guy who replays a lot of games, but I don't generally do that. I just know that about myself, except for some few exceptions like Pillars of Eternity and Mass Effect, for example. One really neat thing that was emphasized in this interview with Carrie Patel are the tooltips feature, and this is primarily for people who want to understand the world and the lore that is there. Now, obviously, I'm going to recommend that you listen to this show, but chances are you're listening to my voice. You already know that, but so maybe let other people know to listen to the show. But no, anyways, there is a nice tooltips feature which was featured in the game Pentiment recently, which was incredibly helpful for people who are not history buffs. Like myself, I am not a history buff. So playing Pentiment, there was a button you could press where words that were contextualized to that time and place, the screen would kind of pan out and you would get little definitions to help you understand what these words meant. Same thing here in Avowed. As you are playing the game, there will be words that are highlighted in the dialogue text. And if you hit the tooltip option, a little panel will slide out and it will show you, or it will describe to you what it is you're reading. So the example that's given in the gameplay demo is the word Aethys, which is one of the gods of this world, god of light and redemption, and there's a bit of history that goes there. So if you hit the tooltip option, a little slide will come out that says Aethys and gives a quick description of who and what Aethys is. This will be really helpful for people who have never played a game in the world of Eora before, or for people who have been away for a long time who just need a quick reminder. It's also going to be useful for people like me, even though I know a lot about the lore. It's going to be neat to see what kind of things they write in, because I think the more perspectives and more things that they have written kind of gives you a more rounded idea of what they think the lore is, or how they're trying to present it. We did learn that there is no pickpocket skill, so you're not going to be able to just walk up and steal from people like you did in the Outer Worlds, but apparently it will come up in dialogue to do something like that, so I don't know if that'll be like planting items on a person or taking something off of a person, but apparently it's not a skill you can utilize, but it will come up uniquely in dialogue. I'm guessing if you have the right level of attributes or something like that. They didn't include pickpocketing, and this also led to Carrie Patel commenting that there's no crime mechanic, so there isn't really anything like that regard, and you can kind of see that in the Outer Worlds and other such RPGs where if you commit certain crimes, then there is a response from the game. I'm sure that if you try to kill people openly in a town, then there would be some level of response. But there also could be the option that when you're in a certain area, that combat is, for a sense, turned off. Who knows, right? Like maybe it's like when you're on the Presidium in Mass Effect, because I'm playing that right now. You can pull out your gun and you can aim it at people, but they won't let you pull the trigger on an actual person. So who knows what Obsidian's planning to do there. But they don't have a crime mechanic. We have heard said, and this has been mentioned before, that the companions are also very integral to the main story. And this has been mentioned and alluded to before, but it's very explicitly stated here. The companions are integral to the main story. It's not just that you have to have companions. It's not just that they are unkillable so that you can't get rid of them if you don't want them. It's that they also play a major part of the main story. There are going to be locations and times in the narrative where they actually must be in your party and you have to take them along with you. So whether you like some of the companions or not, tough titties, you're going to have some of them along with you at any time. I don't know if you can go down to 1 or if you can go down to 0, but you do technically have them in your party at the party camp. So you might be able to actually go out solo and play the game, but they're still going to be present in the story. And lastly, with this particular article, there was some gameplay footage that was in this interview because it is a video. And during this gameplay footage, there is actually a section of the video where the person playing the game picks up a journal entry and they scroll through it. And it's a little too fast to read, but thankfully someone on Reddit, the username I'm Elise, IMALEASE, by the way, shout out to this person who has been just really active on the Avowed subreddit lately and has really been collecting a lot of this information and putting really helpful comments together and doing something like this. For example, if you went to Avowed's possible endings reach into double digits, Gamescom 2024, posted on Avowed subreddit. He also put a comment on here. That was Ordis who posted this, sorry, but I'm Elise posted in a comment the actual transcript of this journal, so it's easy to read. So thank you for that, and I'm going to read it out here today. This is a journal entry that theoretically could be part of the expedition crew that is part of this quest. It's dated 3 Pre-Autumn 2830. So 3 is the day of the season. Pre-autumn is kind of like the month that is kind of like pre-autumn, so early autumn, if you will, early fall, and 2830 is the year in this fantasy world. For context, Pillars of Eternity 1 takes place in 2823, and Deadfire takes place only a few years after that. So this is just a couple years after Deadfire. Anyways, new orders came down from Deirin today. We're to be sent to the Living Lands. The diplomatic corps has established an embassy in the port city of Perdis, and they need support cataloging the unusual ruins there. No doubt it will take months, perhaps a year or two at the very best. I had promised Rudwin I'd be in High Crown to celebrate Inestu with him and the children, especially since it'll be Miri's coming of age. But how often are you given the opportunity to lay the foundation of study for a previously undiscovered ancient culture? I'm sure he'll understand, and Miri, well, I think my daughter will be glad I'm gone. It's not like the gods are making new continents. The world is getting smaller every day. So this is the first entry out of several. This journal is called Gjeda's Journal, Gjeda, and so presumably it's written by her. Apparently she was supposed to go to a location known as High Crown, which I surmise is a location back in the home continent of Adir, where we're not playing the game, but that's where your character is from. It seems like she has a family there. She was supposed to go back and celebrate Inestu, which is a part of the yearly calendar, but it also signifies a moment. I think it's like the New Year or something. I can't remember exactly, but something we're celebrating. And it sounds like she's not going to go back, and they're not going to like that very much. So she is here in an embassy in a port city of Paradis, which we've already learned about is a location in Avowed, in the first major biome of this game. And she's going to be helping catalog the ruins, very likely referencing the godless ruins that we've talked about on this show before. The next entry is dated 17 Pre-Iverno 2830, so same year, but later on in a different season. So this is, I think, what would this be, early winter or something along those lines? It always seems as though the moment I get my sea legs, we're pulling into harbor. And a charming harbor it is, despite what Darren told me, and not so nearly dangerous as the clerks in High Crown warned. I swear on the Queen, half my countrymen resent any city that isn't the Emperor's purely on principle. There was a letter waiting for me when I arrived at the embassy. I suppose Rudwin sent it before I left. The cowards filed for dissolution of our marriage, but he couldn't muster the stones to tell me to my face. Let him assume it never arrived, for I certainly won't dignify it with a reply. This whole episode has given me a blinding headache, a horrible pinching sensation right between the eyes. All right, so this next entry of Gjeda's, I'm saying Gye, but I think GJ is actually J, so maybe it's Jada. I should probably be saying Jada. I don't remember my Adiran dialects. I should go and brush up on that. But anyways, I'm going to go with Jada from here on. It seems that Jada has got to the harbor, so it's taken quite some time to get there. And it seems that her family was none too happy about her decision to not be with them, and they're filing for a dissolution of their marriage. As well, we get a little bit of flavor in this first paragraph about how Adirans can regard places that aren't their own, right? So she thinks that this city is charming, but other people are like, well, it's not the Emperor's pure city, so it's not that great. So a little bit of flavor there from like how the people of Avowed are, or the people of Adir are. And something I really love that Obsidian does is they really put a lot of personality into even just one sentence like this. You get a lot of storytelling right there that you weren't even aware of. So anyways, this ends off with her getting a blinding headache, which I'm guessing is going to have to play into some stuff later on, considering they took the time to write it out. This next entry is dated 4 days later, 21 Pre-Iverno 2830. We've had a few days to settle into life at the embassy while the powers that be argue how best to make use of us. While I was resting, the ambassador's clerk took the scouts to some dreadful little swill house in the rough part of town. Naturally, a couple of younger lads poisoned themselves with alcohol. The mother in me wants to be furious, but I can hardly muster the energy. As long as Ulfric's voiding his stomach in the canals and instead of in the bunkhouse, it's not my business, after all. I think I'll take the team to Fort Northreach, see if we can help their archivist identify the purpose of the godless ruins there. So this person is now kind of just settling into the embassy of Adir, theoretically speaking, and they mentioned that there's a little rough part of town here. There's a little swill house in a rough part of town, so perhaps when we're playing in Avowed in this town or in this city, we'll actually be able to see this rough part of town. where these people went to go imbibing with alcohol. It also references another location of Fort Northreach, where they can go identify some things about the Godless ruins there. Godless being a faction that have to do with the game of Avowed. We don't know a lot about them, but that they were an ancient faction of people that lived on the living lands a long time ago. This next entry is in later within the season, so it's a different month, but still the same season, and this is actually technically speaking, within the next year. So the year ends halfway through winter, I believe, and then the next year starts in the latter half of winter. So this is dated 1 Tariverno 2831. Blessed New Year. The team acquitted themselves well at the fort. With Caedmon's help, I was able to get down into the basement of the ruins and take a good look at the construction. Naturally, I left the notes I took at the fort. I can feel I hardly even think these days, but I believe I remember enough of what I learned to write a satisfactory report for the ambassador. Could these ruins have been the site of a fertility temple? I mean, goodness, look at the shape of their buildings. That's a cheeky little reference. I did notice, I haven't said this before, I did notice that some of the architecture of the Godless ruins can at times look slightly phallic. I don't know if maybe that's what this person's referencing or maybe there's something else. But there was a couple phallic moments when looking at the architecture of these ruins. But anyways, this isn't the whole... Sorry, I interrupted this particular entry, one paragraph in out of 3. I just thought that was funny and worth mentioning. The cool thing that's mentioned here, though, is Caedmon, who is a person that is related to the Dawn Treader quest we see in the gameplay demo, is mentioned here. As well, it also seems that she left some notes at the fort. I'm guessing that refers to Fort Northreach, so perhaps there's some notes over there that when we play the game we can actually get into and read to help give us some more understanding of what's going on. Anyways, let's continue on this entry. The Steel Garrote Inquisitor attached to the embassy has uncovered rumor of a holy relic in a cave here in Dawnshore, and she suggested we might want to investigate. I know I should be eager to get down there to explore, but I've hardly been able to get out of my bedroll since we've returned to Paradis. I'll bet there's a curse tablet with my name on it that Rudween's installed at the Temple of Skaen back in High Crown. Nothing else could explain this hideous nightmare I've been having. Mushrooms erupting from my skin, my eyes replaced by quivering stalks, Miri turning into a tree, Rudween splitting hair and opening like a flower. No matter what drug I take or to which god I pray, they refuse to go away. So some interesting things here. One, the Steel Garrote Inquisitor very likely refers to Inquisitor Lodween, who we've talked about on the show before. She's a returning character from Deadfire, the second Pillars game, and she is acting as a leader of the Steel Garrote Paladin Order, which is one of the major factions for the game of Avowed. She is of the opinion that you should try to tame the Dream Scourge, which is this soul plague infecting the area, rather than destroy it. And speaking of Dream Scourge, I am willing to guess that Jada is starting to succumb to symptoms of the Dream Scourge, just based on what they say here in the latter parts of this entry. But yeah, so Lodween has apparently kind of given her the instructions or suggested that they should investigate a holy relic in a cave nearby, and this is very likely the holy relic that we see in the Dawn Treader quest in the gameplay demo, referring to the Splinter of Aethys, which we can talk about later. The final entry in this journal for Jada is dated 6 Prima 2831, so this is early in the next season. I collapsed while we were gearing up at the market, and none of the merchants would help me off the ground. One of them muttered something about the Dream Scourge, and ran off to tell his mates. I tried to tell the man I wasn't sick, only suffering from my husband's disloyalties, but I couldn't speak. It was like my tongue had turned to mud. The Inquisitor pulled me aside when the boys got me back to the embassy. She was able to press locals for more information about the relic. It was taken from Aethys' Titan skeleton, the very one I had made a reputation discovering, and it's well known for its ability to heal anyone who holds it. Isn't that strange? And it just kind of ends there. So apparently it was cut off at the word strange. I did forget to mention that in the previous entry, that she makes a remark that there is a cursed tablet with her name on it that her soon-to-be maybe ex-husband installed at the Temple of Skaen. Skaen is one of the gods of this world, typically having to do with rebellion or revenge. And so the idea that someone would put your name on a tablet and bring it to the Temple of Skaen to invoke a curse on you is definitely within the wheelhouse of the lore of this world. But getting back to this particular entry here, we see that they're definitely alluding to the idea that she has caught the Dream Scourge, or she's been infected with it. We don't really know how it's transmitted or what goes on there. And then this final part definitely alludes to the idea that the relic that they're referring to that Inquisitor Lodwyn wants to get has to do with this quest that we see in the Gamescom demo, so directly relating to that. It seems like Jada actually made a discovery regarding Aethys's Titan skeleton, which is very interesting. I don't know if that refers to the Colossus that you see in the second Deadfire game, or if it refers to a previous manifestation. I'm guessing the Colossus, but we don't actually know for sure. That's where I'm going to conclude the IGN interview with Carrie Patel at Gamescom. So there's all the stuff that we've learned from that, as well as a transcript of one of the journal entries that we see in the Gamescom demo itself. There is a bit more lore in the photograph of Avowed's theater. So if you had the good luck of being able to go to Gamescom, which, by the way, if anyone listening to the show did go to Gamescom and you got to play the game firsthand, if you want to, just let me know, of course, how that was for you, like what the experience of playing Avowed was like, or if you'd even like to write something, or you'd even like to record your own voice and actually I can put it on the show and people can hear it, that'd be awesome. No one has to, obviously, but if that's something you would like to do, if anyone listening to this has done that, please feel free to do so. But anyways, at Gamescom, there was an entire kind of structure set up for Avowed, and this structure also featured some what you would see as in-game banners representing different factions. So we saw banners, flags representing the Valian Trading Company, the Principi Sen Patrena, the Rauatayan Empire, and the Glonfothan Empire. And then there was another one that I didn't recognize. I'm guessing it's probably related to us. I'm hoping I'm not just missing something obvious there, but there was a fifth banner there that I'm pretty sure is about the Aediran Envoy, so you or people like you. Perhaps it has something to do with the Steel Garrote. I'm not 100% sure. But we definitely saw banners for Valian Trading Company, Principi Sen Patrena, Rauatai, and Eir Glonfoth. And these are 4 empires that we have seen in the previous Pillars of Eternity games, especially in the Pillars of Eternity 2 Deadfire. We see 3 of those. Eir Glonfoth is featured only in Pillars of Eternity 1. They're a major player in Pillars of Eternity 1. It's interesting to see them here, especially compared to other people like the Dear Woodens, for example. I'm surprised to see the Glonfothans, or see that banner anyways. Now, that could have just been decoration. I do want to point that out. That doesn't imply that these factions are present in the game Avowed, that they're going to have a big say. That could just be Avowed decoration, or like Eoran decoration for the sake of decorating. So I'm not going to put that expectation out there. But it would be interesting to see these factions at play here in Living Lands. I could see all of them, even the Glonfothans from the first Pillars game, because I have a theory, and a lot of others agree, that they might have actually originated from the Living Lands. They might have actually been the early godless people that we talk about here. And so some of them might have returned back. Knowing this, I don't know. That's just kind of my idea. So it's interesting to see these factions. I would talk about them right now, but I could go on for a long time. Each one of them pretty much has their own episode. So if you're interested, go ahead and check out the VTC, that's Valian Trading Company, the Principi Sen Patrena, Rauatai, or Eir Glonfoth, any of those episodes if you want to learn more about their factions. A quick little summary: Valian Trading Company is a mercantile company that is basically created to make their nation, the Valian Republics, rich by any means possible. The Principi Sen Patrena is a pirate confederation that is the result of a failed and collapsed society of Old Valia, which, interestingly enough, is where the Valian Republics came out of originally as a colony. Rauatai is their own empire far to the north. They are a hardy group of people. Kai, our companion, actually comes from there, and they are constantly bombarded by storms, and the ground is very hard to yield any sort of crop. So it's very hardy living, and they're constantly exploring the world to see if they can bring back resources to help their people survive. And the Glonfothan people are native tribes of people that you meet in the first Pillars of Eternity game that were living on this continent that was newly discovered and was being settled by colonists, but the Glonfothans were the people that were already living there, and they had migrated generations ago from another place, which I theorize is Living Lands, but who knows. The next thing that I'm going to want to talk about is an article from Eurogamer. This is a review, but written by somebody who hasn't played Pillars of Eternity as much as some of these other reviewers, and I think they even admit that in the thing. And they didn't seem to like Pillars of Eternity, not Pillars of Eternity. They didn't seem to like Avowed as much. They didn't say that they disliked it, but they definitely didn't seem as enthused as some of the other reviewers, which is fine, right? You're going to get a range of responses. They titled it, "Avowed plays like a funny Obsidian role player where you buddy up with the voice of Mass Effect's Garrus." Just, again, referring to Kai, the companion, being voiced by Brandon Keener, the same voice for Garrus Vakarian in Mass Effect. So this reviewer played as a barbarian, which I've heard is a lot easier to play than a mage so far, at least according to the gameplay demo. But yeah, so they played as a barbarian, a heavy hitter, a lot of charge attacks, very aggressive style that you can play with that. There's lots of good uses of humor, he notes, and there's definitely some good uses of humor that we can see in the game. I don't remember seeing this at one point, but apparently when you're talking to the NPC Caedmon, he's remarking how he's going to die a virgin, and you as a player character can look at Kai, your companion, and be like, we can't let him die a virgin. Kai, get in there. And it's just like, there's definitely a whole bunch of various tones of colorful humor in there, and me personally, I'm all for it. I wasn't going to have Kai as a companion, but since I've learned that he has a very sarcastic attitude, I think I might actually keep him around. I really like companions that bring a sense of humor to the gameplay. This is where I saw the first mention of Sargemas before I actually watched the gameplay demo. Sargemas is very excitingly, for me and fellow lore nerds on this show, is a Dawn godlike or an Aethys godlike. If you're familiar with Pillars of Eternity lore, you'll know what a godlike is, and you'll know that this is rather exciting development. So Sargemas is as far as we can tell, an Aethys godlike, which means he is kind of made in the image of Aethys, or he has aspects like the god of Aethys, who's the god of light and redemption, etc., etc. And someone referred to him as the Golden Quicksilver Man, or a King Midas type of person. He looks like he is made of gold almost, or that he is like one of those statue people that pretend to be gold statues in public parks that don't move or something. That's kind of what he looks like, but he has like fancy markings on his face. His eyes are just glowing bright yellow. He talks in like very religious overtones, so he's a very interesting character, voiced by Matt Mercer, I'm pretty sure. I'm definitely interested to learn more about him. He seems to be one of the central figures in this Dawn Treader quest that you can see in the gameplay demo, and he's the one asking you to do something, and he's trying to get a hold of Aethys, is the short version of what's going on with him. Later in this article, some other things mentioned that I thought were worth writing down, I guess. The surprise melee attack, he talked about that. We do get to see that in the canned footage. So the gameplay demo, you can see the actual gameplay demo of Obsidian developers playing the game, but there's also a non-commentary version that Microsoft has released to other reviewers as well, and some people have just put it up without commentary. You can see the surprise melee attack, which very interestingly looks like you're taking out a Mass Effect Omniblade and stabbing people with it. That's not my words. That's the person who wrote this article says that. And they really mention a lot in this article. This person noticed the amount of elemental stuff going on. I saw it remarked in a couple other places, but this person really takes time to show off that, like, shock, burn, corrode, and freeze. Like, you're seeing a ton of these everywhere and how they interplay with each other. And he really mentioned the usefulness of grenades, which me personally am excited to play with, because the explosions and the gunplay for me really looked engaging, and I'm really looking forward to it. So I'm either going to take a break right now and then come back later, possibly tomorrow on my work break, and record more, or I might actually just end the episode now, in which case I'll probably just delete this audio, or I won't, because I want to be cheeky towards myself, and yeah, whatever. So I will come back in a second to either continue or end the episode. And I am back. If I sound different, it's because it's the next day and I'm a different level of hydrated. But I think I still have the same energy, so let's get back into what we were talking about and keep moving forward, because we have a lot to go through. The next thing that I'm going to discuss is the IGN review, which says they got their hands on Obsidian's first RPG, and they think that it is fantastic. They say that Avowed looks and feels great, which I think re-emphasizes the fact that Avowed is in fact done. I know a lot of people out there are speculating that it was delayed because it needed more polish or that it wasn't quite ready. While I personally don't buy the entire story of, we're trying to give your backlog a break, I think that there is a strategic point to why they delayed Avowed. I don't think it's because the game isn't finished. Obsidian has, as far as I'm concerned, they're pretty honest with a lot of the things they say, and they don't generally say things unless they mean it. At least that's been my experience. I don't know, maybe long-term fans can say otherwise. I'm not sure, but they say it's ready, so I kind of trust them on that. And it sounds like, according to this review anyways, that it definitely looks and feels like it is done. There's a compelling story, which is something we're not very surprised about because it's an Obsidian game, so they're going to have a compelling story. We learn about a couple of Kai's abilities in this article, such as his fire and ice attack, where he teleports to an enemy to help stun them, or his leap of daring, which is an area of effect attack. And you can see this in the exclusive demo roles of all three archetype builds that are used. So if you're going to look up footage of gameplay from this demo that was done, you can actually see his attacks being used. Again, they seem to reiterate here that mages are more difficult of the three options to play. Not that there's only three options to the game, but in the gameplay demo, there was three options given. One was a mage, one was a ranger, and one was a fighter, or a barbarian, I guess. And the mage seems to be more difficult. So this isn't too surprising. Magic builds usually, in my experience anyways, and a lot of RPGs tend to have a rougher start, and they get more powerful later on, so this doesn't seem too surprising. The combat was challenging, which I've also heard remarked on the Iron Lords podcast, that it was surprising how challenging it was. So I don't know about you guys. I know I'm going to be turning the difficulty down a little bit, but that's because I'm mostly focused on lore and story. But I do like a engaging combat encounter, so I don't know. Maybe I'll keep it at like normal or swap it back and forth depending on how it goes. They mentioned in the article that you can switch loadout with just the press of the Y button. So this is a one button press and you're swapped to a completely different loadout, which me personally I'm excited for. I'm planning on having a grimoire loadout in one and then a double pistols loadout in the other. I just really like the way the pistols looked and felt from watching the demo. And I really like the idea of utilizing magic, especially with all the lore tied to it. But I'm not sure what weapon I'm going to use alongside the grimoire. If I can double grimoires, have one in each hand, I might do something like that, but we'll see. I definitely like the idea of switching loadouts really quickly. I know that there is a lack of realism to it, especially if armor is included in that, but I haven't heard whether that's true or not. But if armor is included, that's obviously not entirely realistic. That being said, it is a game, so I think that there is a level of suspending disbelief that we have to do when we play any game, and I don't think they're going for ultra realism with Avowed. So in my books, it's like it's just part of the gameplay, like the strategic part of gameplay, and I'm fine with that personally, but I don't know if they're going to include armor, so we'll see. And again, outlining the humor within the game, using the example of the caveman dying a virgin and asking Kai to get in there and not let him die that way. So yeah, just referencing that again. And the next article of people who got their hands on it was Games Radar. The writer for this one really got into the combat, like they really talked a lot about the meat and potatoes of it. They titled it, Playing Avowed feels like an Obsidian RPG with Skyrim-like combat, dialogue options that reflect your build, and newbie-friendly fantasy lore. I'm not going to talk a lot about all of these articles because a lot of them repeat information, so it's kind of unnecessary and kind of boring for you to have to listen to a lot of the same information. One thing that was interesting to note here was that there was a unique item called a Divine Thorn that is mentioned in this article, so that's some sort of luminescent unique blade. I'm really loving the fact that we're getting a lot of unique weapons and items. That's really something that is attracting me to all this. I mean, I'm already going to get the game anyways, but I'm more hyped for that now. He talks at length about the radial menu access for companion commands and our abilities. I'm not generally a fan of radial menus. I don't know about you guys, but it did seem to be fairly intuitive. I didn't like that you open a radial menu and then you had to go to the throwables category and then choose from a list of throwables. It just seems like a lot of like going back and forth into categories and subcategories, which I think interrupts gameplay a little bit. But I do like that the radial menu does pause combat, which I think is sensible if you're having to navigate through it pretty complexly. I don't think complexly is a word, but you know what I meant. So there's a positive aspect to it for me, is that they got the real time with pause thing from Pillars of Eternity in a sense. But they also mention here in Games Radar article that there are 4 spells in a grimoire at a time, which makes sense because you can only have 4 abilities tied to, I guess, a weapon or to each hand or whatever at a time. So it makes sense that a grimoire would only have 4 active spells at a time. And we combine this with information later and a little bit earlier, I guess we kind of already discussed it, that you can actually take spells out of a grimoire and then put them into your own custom grimoire to have 4 spells that you want to carry with you. So once you pick up a grimoire off the ground, even if you haven't spent a point to unlock a particular spell, if there is that spell in there, like one you haven't unlocked yet from upgrading, you can now have access to that spell for free. You are still going to have to put points into it to upgrade the spell to make it more potent, but it's interesting to know that you can access spells not just through upgrading, but also finding them out in the world. I'm also willing to bet that grimoires themselves, the actual books that you pick up, have their own unique benefits or something like that as well, so you might want to hold one book over another. I don't know if you can customize grimoires that you pick up off the ground, or if it's just the one that you carry as a player character. I would imagine you can customize the ones you pick up, or maybe there's only certain ones that can. Moving on to one of the podcasts, Gamertag Radio, they had an interview with 2 developers from Obsidian, one of which was Matt Hansen. I cannot remember the other person's name right now. I'm so sorry. I can't even remember the actual people that were on that show. I think that was the one with Maddie Plays. Whatever. Anyways, Gamertag Radio, if you're interested in checking it out. There wasn't a lot of information in either of the podcasts that we aren't learning from these articles, so I'm not really going to spend a lot of time on it. This is, I believe... No, this isn't the one with Mr. Maddie Plays, because that's where they bring up 30 frames, so that's on Iron Lords. Anyways, using the comment section here, a lot of people noticed in the gameplay footage that was going on in the background that there were some monk abilities being referenced, so there aren't monk classes, I guess, in this game, obviously, but there are apparently some skills that we can use to kind of build a monk-like character, so that was good to see. One thing I really liked about both the Gamertag Radio podcast and the Iron Lords podcast was you could really, really see the enthusiasm behind the developers at Obsidian. Like, they were just pumped for this game, and they're super excited for people to see it and talk about it. Apparently, they can't talk about the final zone because it gets weird. That's one thing I heard in, I can't remember which of those podcasts, is that the biomes get progressively weirder and weirder as you progress throughout the game. So it's interesting to see like how the Dream Scourge is probably going to have an effect on the area, as well as how just crazy the Living Lands gets as you move inland. Because as we know from the lore, the Living Lands is a place where really any kind of biome can exist there. So it's a creative person's dream for a setting. The next thing was from Digital Trends. They have a hands-on preview for Avowed, and they did an interview. One thing I liked about the Digital Trends article was the guy there, you could tell that he knew Pillars of Eternity, the guy who wrote this article. So it was neat to see some articles come from different perspectives. It was rather impressed by the visuals, which is something we've heard already, and they discussed how they used sightlines to direct players, which is really interesting if you get into like design of video games and the psychology of players and how you direct them to certain areas. Like I believe Matt Hansen was talking about how players generally won't turn around in video games, so they have to design games in such a way where information is being given from like the forward cone of vision. I don't know about you guys, I turn around in games a lot. I'm like obsessed with exploring every single corner of the world that's out there. And the person who wrote this article for Digital Trends did note, and this is something I'm very happy to hear as well, that the narrative is not sacrificed for the action. I was a little concerned about that when I was seeing so many action-heavy trailers and features early on, although I understood it from a marketing perspective. But, you know, this is a world I've come to know and love, and I also know that a lot of the developers on Avowed are probably not the same developers from Pillars of Eternity, so there's going to be a different flavor to it. And part of me was like, I really hope that we don't lose some of that. I still trust Obsidian, I love the games they put out, right? But it's just when something's near and dear to you, you get that little worrisome thing. But it was good to hear that the narrative is not sacrificed for the case of action, which, again, I'm not surprised about, but it's just good to hear. Next thing to mention is a Twitter post from Mikey Dowling, which has to do with the HUD and UI customization, because a lot of people had remarked on Reddit that, wow, it looks like there's a lot of things going on the screen when we're in combat. I really hope that they can like change that in some way, shape, or form, or that we can like get rid of certain things. Some people are fine with it, some people don't like it. So people were hoping that there are HUD options, and Mikey Dowling put up a post on Twitter, and it shows the settings for Avowed. So I'm not going to go into detail for each one. I'll just quickly mention here. You can enable the HUD or just turn it off entirely. There's an option for a quest tracker mode. There's show region names, experience notification display, objective markers display, damage numbers display, aiming reticle, ability radial readying. Not sure what that one is. Grimoire radial readying, item radial readying, notification duration length, showing the compass, and on the compass you have show pickables, which is, I don't know why, that's a funny word for me, show corpses, show hostiles, show god shrine totem pieces. So that's interesting. I don't know what that's entirely about, but some sort of collectible thing, I think, in the game. So seems like there's pretty high degree of customization for what you can see on screen. I didn't see customizations for entirely everything on there, so there might be some things we can't remove no matter what, like perhaps the outline of enemies during combat. I don't know, but we'll find out when we actually play the game. But it looks like there's going to be some form of customization for that if you're concerned about it at all. The next thing I had looked at was the Iron Lords podcast, which there's nothing new on that we don't need to discuss here. This is where Matt Hansen points out that there are 50 plus slides that you'll probably see at the end of the game, or at least that there are 50 plus slides being developed. So there's a lot of ending slides for the game. And this is also where they had made the comment that 30 frames per second was what they are targeting as the minimum. So I don't think they've confirmed that it's locked at 30. I don't know if it's locked for sure at 30 or if that's just where they're going to keep it at minimum or to a range. But this has definitely sparked a lot of debate within the community of, people's opinions on that. Me personally, I'm fine with it. As I've mentioned here and on other podcasts, I'm okay with 30 frames per second. I've grown up with pretty low frame rates, so I'm pretty okay with it. But having a PC and playing at 60 frames per second, I've done many games like that, including one of my favorite games in the past with Destiny. So I understand that it's way better. Like, I do get it. It is just better. But I think for the era that we're still in gaming, I don't know that I agree with some people like Matty Plays that it is the industry standard that things are 60 frames per second. I don't know if I agree with that. I think we're still kind of in this in-between period where it's just sort of like it depends on the developer, it depends on the console, it depends on what they want different players to have access to or what the priority of the game is. One day, 60 frames will probably just be the bare minimum, and we'll be talking about how, oh my goodness, why isn't something 120 frames per second? But I don't think we're quite there yet. And I think that's okay. I think that we need to have a little patience with that. But definitely understanding, like, you see outcry on Reddit or things like that like, oh, it sucks that it doesn't 60 frames per second. And that's totally valid. Like, it's a disappointment. Hopefully it's not a disappointment that makes you not buy the game. Personally, I don't think that is a deal breaker, but to each their own, right? So there are a number of other articles, such as the Video Game Chronicles, where they discuss the 30 frames per second because it was a hot topic. And at the time of recording, there was, as I predicted earlier in this episode, articles being written and things that were going to be put out. So there's already more things on Reddit to go and check out that I'll try to summarize a little bit later at the end of this, but I want to skip ahead to the actual gameplay demo themselves. So I got a number of screenshots while I was watching the demo. I'm not going to do a breakdown of the demo here because, as you can understand, but I'm going to talk about a lot of things that we see. One of the first things I want to mention is Sargamas. I've already talked about him before, but it's worth mentioning here, especially now that I'm looking at a picture of him. Sargamas, as previously mentioned, is a godlike in the world of Eora. If you're interested in knowing more about what a godlike is, on top of what I've already said, I have done an episode on the godlike. Feel free to check an episode on that. It really talks about what they are, how they come about, and the importance that they play within the world. Sargamas, as mentioned before, is an Aethys godlike. That means that he has been touched by the god Aethys in some way, and he has a visage that matches that divine nature. In the gameplay demos, we actually get to see different backgrounds at play. I'm looking at one of the Arcane Scholar, where you're talking with Sargamas and you're able to use your knowledge as an Arcane Scholar to say, oh hey, I recognize that you named yourself after one of the early figures in Aethesian scripture. So Sargamas might not even be this person's actual name, that's just kind of a moniker they've adopted. As well, we get to see the tooltips option at play in the gameplay demo, so if you're more curious on how that works, go and check them out on anything. You can just look up Avowed gameplay demo, and you'll almost certainly get something like this. And at one point in the conversation with Sargamas, there is a little highlighted section of the words "once shining god," which refers to Aethys. If you press the X button, it opens up the dialogue history, and it also gives you lore tips on the right side of the screen. In this case, it says Aethys, and it gives a little description on what Aethys is, because that's who the once shining god is. So if there are ever any terms that you don't understand in conversation, you just press this button, and it'll explain some of them to you. As far as I know, it'll stay open as long as you keep it open, and until you hit X again, then all that stuff disappears. Now, out of curiosity, I want to see what they say in Avowed, because in every single game, they describe things like the gods and whatnot, the lore of the world. They have their own in-game encyclopedia, and each one says something a little bit different because of the times. So I'm curious here. This is what Avowed says as an encyclopedia reference for Aethys. Aethys is the god of rebirth, redemption, dawn, spring, and light. Years ago, a farmer by the name of Widewin claimed to be a vessel of Aethys and went on a rampage across the eastern reach. Aethys was destroyed, but later rose again in the Deadfire Archipelago. What happened to him there is a matter of speculation. So there's actually a lot of lore going on there. Aethys being one of the gods, obviously mentioned here, inhabited a farmer named Widewin. He rampaged across the eastern reach, which is a continent in the world of Eora. There are some other things as well in other, I think the ranger or the mage, not the mage, the barbarian playthrough. They actually have more things in the tooltips than just the one that you see from Obsidian and their gameplay demo at the actual Gamescom event, such as Envoy. Envoy is one of the words that are highlighted, and you can hit the tooltips option to see what their in-game encyclopedia reference is for the game Envoy. You are the Envoy, an official representative of a deer sent on behalf of the Emperor to investigate the Dream Scourge and maintain order in the living lands. Something we already knew about our character, but it's cool to see the actual in-game description for it. There's also Audra. Audra is a crystal with deep spiritual significance, the road through which souls travel from life into death. Animancers use Audra to siphon essence into their machines. Some cultures use it for sculpture. Others defend Audra pillars as the lifeblood of Eora. So there we have a definition of Audra, a very important resource within this world of Eora, and is going to be central in some of the stories that we see in Avowed. There's an entry for Hylia, because Hylia is referenced at one point in time when you're talking with Sargamas. Hylia is the goddess of the sky, maternity, creativity, birds, song, invention, language, and the arts. She has been known to take the form of various birds in order to inspire, or even spy, on mortals. Another god that gets mentioned when talking with Sargamas is Magrin, and the tooltips option describes Magrin as the goddess of war, fire, transformation, purification, consumption, and trials. Her followers believe in self-improvement through rigorous struggle and hard-won achievements. Still yet another god mentioned when talking with Sargamas is Wall, who happens to be my favorite. Wall is a god of secrets, revelations, illusions, cryptography, obfuscation, perception, dreams, and visions. There's a couple other words there than I'm normally used to. Their followers are a mystery even to each other, reveling in acts of creating and unraveling mysteries. Yeah, I love Wall, and all that is pretty spot on for what that is. And lastly, there is one for godlike, which is the type of person that you are. It's the kind of race that you are. Godlike in this game are defined as rare individuals whose souls are touched by the gods at birth. Quirks of their appearance reflect their nature of their patron deity, such as feathers, horns, or flames. Over the last few years, many of the godlike in Eora died under mysterious circumstances, but not you. And it would also appear as well, not Sargamas. So yeah, there's some interesting lore that you get. And so this lore I've just read for you, if you're not someone who's played Pillars of Eternity and you're like, oh man, there's going to be all this stuff that I don't know, this is how you can kind of catch up on it. So all that stuff I just mentioned to you is stuff that you can hear about when talking with Sargamas. He's going to mention Wall and Magrin and godlike and stuff. And if you're like, I'm not sure I know what all this is, and you're interested in knowing, you just press a button and you can quickly read this little blurb, which gives you just, quick little description of what it is, and boom, now you know what you're talking about. Now you understand the context of the world that your player character would inherently understand. In the gameplay demo, we learn that the quest that you're playing in is called Dawn Treader, so when you play Avowed, when you get the Dawn Treader quest, you'll know that this is the one that was in the demo, which is where you go to find this expedition that you're looking for, and you know that they're in a certain area in this Temple of Aethys type of place. And while you're searching for this Adiran expedition team, you run into Sargamas, who wants your help because he needs to get this ancient relic item called the Splinter of Aethys to power up this Colossus statue that he's created as a way to trap Aethys, the god, inside of it to answer for his crimes, which has been referenced just recently that I've kind of talked about. Very likely inspired by the events of the Deadfire game. Anyway, it's a very rustic looking statue. I don't know how he plans as a mortal to, just trap a god inside of a thing, but well, hey, all power to him. Interestingly enough, actually, if you are up there near where his statue is, there's a journal that's kind of just off to the side. It's Sargamas's journal, which I'll read for you now what it actually says. So this is Sargamas kind of just writing down entries of things that he's been going through and his thoughts, and it's going to probably be important for you, the player character, in some way. The first entry is dated as 28/28 Priestu, so that's the year and the month. He is gone, but he is still with me. What form should a reliquary take that is fit to hold the splinter? Were I in high crown still, I would petition the church for ivory. Gems and gold for this remnant of his holy body is worth all the wealth in the empire and more. Being as I am sequestered here, I will make do, instead with the wealth of the land. Granite from the tallest peaks, clay from the fertile riverbeds, and trunks from the most aged trees. I must work without ceasing until it is done. The memory of my lord cannot endure delay. So it's interesting for me here because when you watch the gameplay demo, Sargama seems to give this impression that he is mad at Aethys and he wants him to answer for his crimes. But here he seems to almost have a reverence for him, like he just kind of wants him back. So I'm wondering if he's kind of being deceitful towards you, or if perhaps that is an attitude that he developed later on as he was creating this statue. The next entry is 2828 Terrestu, again, year followed by a month within the year. He is beginning to take shape. I thought at first a sanctuary would be appropriate, a temple within the temple of the godless, but when I prayed over my plans for the building's construction, I received a vision of Aethys' Titan as it existed in its time, a body of strange flesh and bone, hundreds of feet tall, astride the land with a pantheon at his side, facing down forces of chaos like elven colossus ships of the line. What crisis manifested them and inspired them to act? So that was the next entry within Sargamis's journal. And 2828, if I understand, is also the time when Deadfire is actually happening. So I don't know if he's getting a vision of the Adra Colossus that Aethys is inhabiting during that game, or if there's something in the distant past when he might have had a titanic body that he walked around with. But it's definitely interesting to see. High Crown is mentioned in the previous entry. I think that is just a city within a deer. Not sure, but based off of the context clues that we've had in other places, that's my best guess. The next entry is in the year 2829, Magiverno. So it's the new year in a different month. He is complete, but the statue I have made is inert, lifeless, dull. The work of my hands does not dignify the splinter. There is something deficient in it and in me. I must destroy it and begin again. So he understands what he wants to do, which is to build this statue to house the god Aethys inside of, but he knows that it's not quite good enough yet, so he's going to rebuild, essentially. And then the second to last entry, 2829 in Prima. So this is a few months later. He is made anew. His effigy is formed from granite, clay, and wood. Still, but they shelter now a precious Adra core. It glimmers even in the low light of this cavern's ceaseless evenings. He brings the dawn to this penumbral place, as the light of his attention once brought to my soul. In the Empire, they celebrate spring dawn today, or they would have. Prior to the Saints' War, I wonder, what of him remains in the beyond after his dissolution at Ukaizo? I long to be with him again. So there's actually a piece of interesting lore here about his dissolution at Ukaizo, but that references kind of near the ending, I would say, of the Deadfire game. I don't think that this is necessary lore for you to have, but it's interesting because they have mentioned you don't need to play those games, the Pillars of Eternity games, to play Avowed. But very clearly, this is also a head nod to those of us who have played it, that we might understand that a little better. And also perhaps as a way to entice you to play the games. And it just ends off with, I long to be with him again. So clearly he misses his god. And the final entry is a month later, and it just is one question: what if I did not have to wonder? And I'm already coming up on a second time when I have to leave. Like I said, I record these during my work breaks, so there's still more footage from the gameplay demo that I want to talk about. There's a lot of items that we pick up that I can read the descriptions of, so here we'll have a quick break.
If you find your trail has run cold, come to me with whatever you have. There is much I may be able to do for you.
All right, and I'm back again, except this time I have 2 hours straight, so I should have more than enough time to be able to finish this off. So let's get going. Again, apologies if there's a change in my voice. It's just the next day. And it's a bit of a dry one over here. But anyways, moving on. Some other screenshots that I managed to take at the Avowed gameplay demo is of some items that we actually see. So at certain points, they open up the menu to equip something on the character, and we actually get a full view of the character, by the way, that's there during the gameplay demo. It appears to be kind of like an ocean folk human, Obviously also godlike, wearing a white robe kind of thing with these. I'm looking at an image where there's 2 wands, one at either side. So obviously they have their weapons equipped in that sense. They have like weapons visible to them as they're running around. But anyways, when we're in the inventory screen, there's a few items that get seen as a result, like they get highlighted. And so we see, like, for instance, I'm looking at an image right now of Audra. Audra is highlighted on the screen. They have 2 of them. It calls it an upgrade material. It has a little picture of it. It kind of looks like a green gemstone rock. And there's also a description for it. Now, we already read the lore tooltips for Audra, but I've noticed that it is also different in the actual physical description of an Audra that you hold on, like that you're holding in your inventory. So this is what it says for the description in the inventory. An organic material, crystalline in structure, but shell-like in substance. Audra can be found protruding from veins in the ground throughout many parts of Eora. Easy to cut and manipulate, it is a favorite semi-precious stone of jewelers. So 2 very different approaches to how they describe Audra, depending on whether you're holding it as an upgrade material in your inventory versus looking at it from a lore perspective in a conversation. I'm going to go through a number of items in the inventory just because that's part of what I find interesting is just reading item descriptions. So the next example will be a health potion. They have 10 of them. It's described as these crimson liquids are attributed with powers of recuperation, restoring energy and liveliness to the weary or wounded. Doesn't dive into any of the lore, obviously, of how health potions are made or how they might work, but it just describes what it is. And that's fair. Perhaps it gets into the lore of it somewhere else. I would imagine that it is imbued with some sort of essence that revitalizes you compared to an essence potion where you're actually probably just consuming essence straight up to give you more of that power to decide what to do with. This is probably more distilled for a specific purpose. The next item is a unique accessory. So unique items are good in that they don't just have a generic description, not that that's bad, but unique items actually usually have lore associated with that item in their item description. So this item, called Night Mistress's Favor, is a unique accessory. It has the Long for Embrace trait, which means if you're standing close to a companion, you will slowly restore your essence, which is kind of like your mana meter for those who want to know. In the description for this item, it reads, this gold crescent moon pin is a particularly fine example of the charms worn by Valian courtesans. Some say the trinkets protect against the hazards of their work. Others claim that they make their time with the patrons more enjoyable. Whether true or not, you do feel strangely invigorated when you hold it and stand near your companion, as if you could take on the world. So I have a little bit of lore here associated with the item and also its long for embrace and trait, which when you're standing near your companion, you slowly restore your essence. And so this probably plays off the lore of, like, if there are multiple sources of living essence nearby, perhaps it strengthens the essence within the item itself that gives it this power, right? Because every living thing on this world has essence in it, and especially living creatures will have, I think, more living essence in it. I'm not sure what the distinction is there on how to describe it to you, but perhaps it's the interplay of them, almost like gravity, right? Like with 2 objects with heavy gravity nearby, it creates a bigger well of gravity, if you will. Perhaps that's kind of the same thing going on with the power of essence. Other such items are the iron chunk, which is just an upgrade material of metal. It's just a chunk of iron. Described as, this chunk of dull iron lacks any real luster. Its surface is pitted with irregularities. And there's nothing in there that's crazy to hear, but I do love the fact that Obsidian took the time to actually write something in, like its surface is pitted with irregularities, which would be true if it was like raw iron that you had, extracted out of the ground. It's cool to see those little details. A unique accessory, it's actually a ring called the Arcanist's Ring. We see the character already has that during the gameplay demo, like they had it before the video. This has the trait of Smart. It increases your intellect by 1, and its item description says, through a combination of rigorous training and innate talent, many individuals throughout Eora are able to open their senses to the essence that permeates all things. To manipulate this essence, however, requires a level of dedication above and beyond what most are willing or able to achieve. Audra rings like this are especially valued by wizards and scholars alike for providing brief flashes of insight and sharper concentration. Allegedly, this is from the echoes of souls that once inhabited the pillar this Audra was taken from, but this theory has never been confirmed. Now it says this pillar this Audra is taken from. The ring has an Audra stone set within it, so that's what it's referencing there. So a little bit of lore here, talking about how people actually use magic within this world. That's always an interesting question to ask whenever you're in a fantasy world where there's magic, is how are people actually performing these magical feats? Like, what is actually going on there? What's the mechanics that are causing it to happen? And in the world of Eora, it's largely around essence, which is the stuff that souls are made of. You heard Kate Dollarhide, I think, refer to it in such a way when she was doing the demo for Obsidian at Gamescom. So you have all the stuff that souls are made of, and it has these this innate power to it that people use for abilities. And it says here that some people are able to open their senses to essence, that's the stuff souls are made of, that permeates all things. And this is including people, animals, plants, rocks, the air around you. Essence is absolutely everywhere, in different degrees of form, I guess. Like, I've heard characters in this game world refer to it as living essence sometimes when it's in a person, so maybe it's more potent that way. So you're able to open yourself up to it, and perhaps it can give you visions or something like that. But to be able to manipulate essence requires a level of dedication, which is why there can be people who are like wizards, for example, or druids, or chanters, people who engage with essence from a particular approach, and that kind of defines the entire class that you see in Pillars of Eternity. Obviously, in Avowed, it's different. We're not having a class-based game. It's classless, but still that approach is still going to be there. Largely, this stuff is having to do with a grimoire. Obviously, if you're playing a mage, which is where you're actually taking these spells, but you're putting it into arcane sigils. So you're basically locking the spells into a book and pulling it out and throwing it at someone is kind of what you're doing here as a wizard. But yeah, this is just a little bit of lore kind of alluding to the magic. And wearing rings like this, where you just have living Audra, which has essence inside of it, you're able to kind of like have a little bit more power as a result of that, because you're wearing it on your person. Next is another unique accessory, another ring called the Band of Transcendent Suffering. This alludes to the monk class from Pillars of Eternity 1 and 2. Again, there's no classes in Avowed, but this is just kind of alluding to some stuff from the monk class. The trait of the Band of Transcendent Suffering is called Mortification, and it says you deal plus 10% damage, but you take plus 10% damage. So a bit of give and take there, which is pretty standard issue for the monk class in Pillars, as well as a lot of other games as well. The monk class in Pillars is really fun. It's all about enduring pain and suffering, and then transforming that pain and suffering within your own soul to actual abilities that you are able to perform, like superhuman speed or strength, etc., etc. But the lore and the item description for the Band of Transcendent Suffering says, an ancient elf monk that adhered strictly to the Shattered Pillar philosophy created this ring as a last act of their long life. This ring causes the wearer's entire body to tingle with barely restrained power as barbs of pure essence latch onto their soul. The strength that it imbues the wearer with is undeniable, but it draws upon the very life of the wearer to do so. Truly, using this band is the ultimate show of confidence that one has in their own prowess. So one thing I'm noticing with the item descriptions in Avowed compared to Pillars of Eternity is that they are really leaning into explaining the trait that these items have. So like this one has Mortification. You deal more damage, but you also take more damage. In unique items from Pillars of Eternity, I found that they didn't really focus so much on trying to necessarily explain away the trait of the item, so much actually like explore the story of the person who might have owned it. Where in this case, they seem to be leaning more in the other direction, which isn't bad. It's just a different approach. And we're still getting a lot of interesting lore inside of it. And when we read a different item later on, I think the Bond of Bitterness or something, we actually do kind of get a story of its previous owner. So they're not abandoning that entirely. This is just what I'm noticing so far. With the Band of Transcendent Suffering, one thing that's mentioned is the Shattered Pillar philosophy. This is a sect of a monk order that can exist. The monks, like I said, they endure pain and suffering, and they turn that pain and suffering into magical abilities that they can essentially use. The Shattered Pillar philosophy is more about using the pain and suffering of others, right? So inflicting pain and suffering upon people strengthens your soul to perform other abilities as well. So it's kind of a reversal, but still has a lot of the same themes that you see in the monk class. This item description seems to imply that there is essence being directly latched onto your soul by wearing this ring. So it's almost like there's essence trapped within this ring that then enters into your body or latches onto the soul that is connected to your body. So it's almost like you're wearing a physical ring, but you're also wearing a spiritual ring on top of that, if you will. or underneath it, depending how you want to think about it. And so it's like your soul itself is also wearing a ring, and it's almost like this ring is hurting your soul to wear, but it also gives you power as it does so. Another upgrade material for armor is called a pelt. This is just a pelt of an animal, described as the stripped skin of a slain beast. This pelt retains the fur of the animal. Pelts like this find use throughout Eora in clothing, armors, and other crafted goods. Again, just another example of them taking the time to write a detailed write-up of a mundane item. Now, bringing up that item that I mentioned before, the unique ring, Bitter Bonding. This has the trait of draining, which gives 10% of weapon damage restored as health. So 10% of all the damage you deal comes back to you as health. The item description says, marriage practices and wedding ceremonies in Eora vary drastically depending on where they take place. One universal constant is a symbol of that bond, be it a knot tied around lovers' wrists, matching rings, or other more exotic practices. Not all such marriages are happy affairs, however, but rather matters of politics and diplomacy. This particular ring has been so suffused with its original owner's spite and bitterness that it now feeds off of the pain its wearer brings to others. And that's bitter bonding. So this is assumedly a wedding ring that used to be owned by someone who was not in a happy marriage, and because they felt so much bitterness and spite in their life, they actually were able to, in a sense, make this ring's nature different, where now it actually feeds off of that pain and suffering, and as well as others, and it imbues strength into the person. So it's almost like you are having a trait of the previous owner's life now. Like, they had the ability to gain strength from their own bitterness and spite that they were living in their their unhappy marriage with. And now, as a result, when you inflict damage upon people, their pain and suffering is kind of transferred to this ring, which then strengthens you, right? So it's kind of like living out that memory, but just in a different kind of a way. So again, this is another example of them using lore to explain the trait of the item itself. It also gets a little bit into the lore. It doesn't go into the specifics of marriage ceremonies in Eora. One of the more interesting ones being Heimneg, which is a ceremonial marriage between elves and humans in the culture of Aedir, because there's no interbreeding in this world. An elf and a human, if they get married, they can't have kids. So in certain cultures, there might be instances where you could intermarry two different races' families, either for political gain or even for love and romance. But then there would also need to be the question of how do we produce kids, right? So if, for instance, an elf and a human were to marry, let's say out of love, then they wanted to say, well, we need to have a kid. One or both would then need to find someone of the same race that they could produce a child with, if that makes any sense. So it would obviously make for very complex romantic and non-romantic relationships in terms of raising a family in an interspecies kind of a way. But there you go, right? So it's an interesting thing to think about. There's definitely a lot of questions that can be raised. The last item to talk about is a unique one-handed sword called the Last Day of Light. And this is the sword that you get if you kill Sargemus in this side quest. I don't have the item description for it, unfortunately, but I do have a good picture of it. It has a symbol of Aethys at the top of its hilt, and the sword itself is also seemingly set ablaze. So it's constantly on fire. So it's a very interesting sword, and it's made in a very good way. It very clearly is aligned with Aethys, and the uniqueness part of it being on fire is also really cool and on point for something like that. We do have some of its stats, like its physical damage of 15, stun of 10, stamina cost is 15, etc., etc. It has the Golden Sun's Ascent trait, which means killing an enemy restores 5% of your maximum health, and Dawn's Remembrance, which adds a 5% bonus of fire accumulation to hits. I'm assuming that you can build up fire damage like some sort of stun. And then there's some stuff about upgrading materials, as well as what you get if you break it down and its weight, etc., etc. But those are all the items that I saw through the demo that I want to talk about. So now let's talk more about some stuff that we still see within this pause screen, right? So we just went through the inventory of stuff that we saw in the demo itself, but there is also the character sheet. In the pause menu, you have different tabs that you can open. There's the abilities, there's the character sheet, there's the inventory screen, the journal, and the map. We just went through inventory. The character sheet lists our attribute points, our level, our current experience, what our background is, and a whole bunch of other statistics like our health, essence, stamina, damage reduction, our regeneration of different things, as well as critical hits and stuff like that having to do with our loadouts and offhands and main hands, etc., as well as the attribute points I already mentioned: might, constitution, dexterity, perception, intellect, and resolve. So all the information you need to know about your character is here. I've mentioned this on a previous episode, but I'll just kind of do another one quickly here. Attribute points, we have might is associated with your damage output as well as your carry weight. Constitution has to do with your health and your poison/bleed resistance. Dexterity has to do with attack speed and action speed, which I'm guessing action speed means like casting a spell, because I did notice that you can get stunned if you get hit, like you can be interrupted. Perception raises your critical hit chance as well as your maximum range. Intellect has to do with how much essence you have available for spells, as well as your elemental resistance. And lastly, resolve has to do with stamina and your second wind efficiency. Second wind will very likely be an ability that everyone gets, which has to do with how it's basically like a quick health potion kind of a thing. The second wind is an ability you had in Pillars of Eternity 2 and 1, I think. Yeah, both of the games, where you could kind of regain some of your endurance. So I don't know if second wind in this game will replenish some of your stamina right away, or your health, or your essence, or all three. But it seems like it's going to be an innate ability that everyone has to restore some form of a resource pool. So those are what the 6 attributes are. They're the same attributes we see from Pillars of Eternity. I only mentioned those to you here now so that you can see or think ahead of like, well, what kind of character might you want to build? Like, do you like to attack fast? Do you like to have a lot of health? Do you care more about the damage you do or how much you can hold on to? Are you big into critical chance or magic? Like, what do you want, right? So like that little description there, you can kind of think ahead of time of what you might want to do. Now, I'm going to mention this as well, but this is largely going to just be for those of you who can pay attention enough to it, so I'll go quickly through it, is that currently, I'm looking at this character sheet, we are at level 6, right? So we started at level 1, presumably, and we've leveled up 5 times. I can see that this person has no points available to put into their attribute points. So theoretically speaking, when you level up, you'll get points that you can put into attribute points. And so the numbers I'm looking at, from might, constitution, dexterity, perception, intellect, and resolve, we have might of 2, constitution of 3, dexterity of 2, perception of 3, intellect of 5 with an asterisk, and a resolve of 1. I believe the intellect should be at 4, but because we're wearing that one ring that increases intellect, it's at 5. So the reason I mention this is because at level 6, we have an accumulated total of 15 points distributed across these things. So I'm only mentioning that in case some people are interested in like, how much leveling up are we going to get to do? I'm assuming that these either all start at base of 1 or 0, like a resolve of 0 might be a thing, who knows? Or maybe it all starts at 1. If it all starts at 1, then that means they have leveled up as a total of 10 points. Versus if we start at 0, then that means they've leveled up a total of 15 points. I think it starts at 0. I can't recall, to be honest. In the last video that we saw where we saw this, I thought they were all 1s, 2s, and 3s, so I can't remember. And so I'm kind of guessing that perhaps we'll have a couple of initial attribute stats that boost from our background at character creation, as well as maybe we get to pick 1 or 2 that also boost 1. It seems to me, though, that maybe we get 2 points per level. Is that, I don't know, is that a reasonable thing to think? Maybe we get 2 points per level to distribute as we level up. We obviously don't know what the level cap is going to be, if there is even a level cap, but it's just some people care about that, so I'm mentioning it here. Now, we're going to move to the abilities tab, right? I know I told you this was a big episode. I was really thorough, so hopefully you're taking it in chunks and you're skipping past the parts that maybe you don't like. But now we're going to go through some of the abilities that we see. Now, I've talked about abilities on other episodes, so I'm not going to summarize absolutely everything, but here are some of the abilities that we saw when we were in the menu and they were highlighted. We have the Fighter, Ranger, Wizard, Godlike, and Companion sub-tabs. So these are the different ability trees, if you will. We only get good looks at Fighter, Ranger, and Wizard. In the Fighter category, we have one called Charge, which is dashing forward and smashing into anything in your way, interrupting enemies and dealing damage. Charge has the power to break through enemy blocks and is capable of destroying destructible walls. In the Ranger category, we have Tanglefoot. Summon entangled vine roots that root enemies in place for 8 seconds. In the Wizard category, we have Minor Missiles. Summon 3 magical projectiles that seek out enemies and explode on impact, dealing large amounts of damage. Armored Essence. This is still in the Wizard category. This is a passive skill. Decrease the essence penalty for light and medium armor by 15. So apparently something to do with armor. Wearing armor as a mage increases how much essence you need to use on spells. Wand Mastery. This is another passive one. Increases damage with wands by 25%. That's a pretty good increase, 25%. The second rank goes to 40%. Blood Magic, another passive trait. When essence is depleted, that's your mana meter for essentially, you may continue casting by reducing your health by 75% of essence cost. So to cast a spell when you don't have any essence, you can sacrifice some of your health. That's a really interesting approach that we do see them utilizing in the gameplay demo. Another passive skill is called Harvest Essence. The essence fragments dropped by defeated enemies restore 2 times as much essence. My guess is that, and we've seen this in the gameplay footage, when you kill an enemy, there's this little purple dot that is kind of floating above where the corpse was. My guess is that you pick that up and it refills your essence meter. So it's not something that I guess refills over time. Maybe it does both, but you can also apparently kill enemies to gain essence that way. Grimoire Mastery, another passive skill. Unlock level 5 Grimoire spells and decrease the essence cost of all Grimoire spells by 10%. So to increase on this means that it's more efficient in casting spells. The active Blizzard spell conjures a violent storm of ice and snow, pummeling enemies in the area with raining ice and frost accumulation. Fireball conjures an exploding sphere of fire that leaves behind deadly lingering flames and fire accumulation. We're seeing this term fire accumulation as well as frost accumulation, which I think is like you're building up a meter of elemental damage to cause something. Like if you build up frost accumulation, my guess is that they freeze, and fire probably lights them on fire. No surprise there. Crackling Bolt conjures a powerful bolt of electricity that bounces between enemies and the environment 3 times, dealing high shock accumulation and stun. This might be pretty useful for crowd control because it's hurting more than one person at a time. Jolting Touch channels a beam of electricity that jumps from the caster's fingers to the nearest enemy and then to the next nearest enemy, causing decreasing amounts of shock accumulation. For all of these wizard abilities, it says that you have, in order to unlock them, you either have to find them in your grimoire or have an available point to spend. Corrosive Siphon channels a beam that eats away at an enemy's soul, inflicting periodic poison accumulation and converting that energy into health for the caster. This looks like a really useful spell, and we see it liberally used on the gameplay demo. Not only the one that Chris and Kate did at the Obsidian demo, but on the actual B-roll that Microsoft gave out to reviewers, for example, as well. And these spells, when you increase their rank, they either increase in damage or they increase in efficiency. The rank for Corrosive Siphon, enemies are stunned in place for the duration of the siphon. So you actually hold them in place while you're siphoning this health from them, and they also can't move, right? So it changes it from where they could move around and you have to kind of follow them to now they're locked in place. So a really useful spell, although it is just one character or one enemy at a time. Arcane Veil, we've seen this one used. It's when the peripheral of the screen kind of has this yellow glow over it with these sigils floating around. This invokes a powerful arcane shield for 15 seconds that makes your spell casting uninterruptible and draws upon your essence to absorb incoming attacks. So basically, if you cast Arcane Veil, which does require some essence to cost, you can cast freely from inside there. People can't interrupt you, which we've already mentioned is a thing in combat. And also, it seems like as enemies hit you with it, it will absorb the damage that they take through your essence. So it sounds like if you use Arcane Veil, it's really good for keeping yourself alive, but you're going to drain your essence really quickly. So that's something to keep in mind. Parasitic Staff. Summon a staff of negative energy for 30 seconds that restores essence to the wielder with every strike. So if you're wanting to play a wizard but still have some level of melee to it, you can actually summon a staff that has extra stuff like taking essence away from the enemy and giving it to yourself, which could be a useful way of getting some essence back really quickly if you're starting to get low. Bristling Frost. The caster is surrounded by a protective frost that increases damage reduction by 25% and deals frost accumulation to enemy melee attackers. We have also seen, so those are all wizard spells, we've also seen some ranger abilities, more ranger abilities such as Shadowing Beyond. Channel the Beyond, becoming invisible and draining essence until your next combat action. So basically you turn invisible for as long as you have essence inside of your mana meter. I keep saying mana meter because it's just what I'm used to, but it's its own thing. Anyways, next ranger ability is Piercing Thrusts. Power attacks with daggers, swords, and spears deal an extra 25% damage. That's really cool because we haven't seen spears utilized in the game yet, so it's interesting to see how Obsidian might do their take on it, considering a lot of the combat actually looks really good, and I can't wait to see how they implemented other forms of combat in the game. But this is very likely that move we see over and over again where they like hold the sword close to themselves and then a light kind of goes shving and then you stab them for extra. So it sounds like exactly what it is, a power attack. Arrow deflection, melee weapons block arrows or similar projectiles when parrying. So there's a parrying mechanic in the game. That's interesting. Apparently, though, you require the move of parry already, so it sounds like you have to unlock parrying. I don't know if that means it's a skill you unlock or if it's part of the narrative, like you learn it as you go. But it's cool to see that not just your shield will also deflect arrows or other projectiles. Power slide is another ranger ability. This one is passive. Your slide passes through enemies and knocks them down at the cost of 10 essence. So if you want to be able to knock people down, which would be really useful for getting a strong attack in, you can do so this way. I did forget to mention that the previous two are also passive, arrow deflection and the piercing thorns. The shadowing beyond, however, is an active ability. The next ability, also passive, is called marksmanship, increases damage with bows and guns by 25%. I know I'll be taking that because I want to play a gun mage. Passive ranger ability, evasive, reduces the stamina cost of dodge by 25%. So there's a dodge mechanic. Again, good to know. Some of you might find this boring. I'm very sorry. But I know that some people out there really like to theorize, like, how might I approach playing this game? Especially if you play the Outer Worlds, you have a little bit of an idea what to come from because they had a dodge mechanic in that game, for example. So I'm just trying to give everyone as much meat and potatoes as they can to theory craft what kind of character they might make. Passive ranger ability, steady aim. Holding your power attacks with a bow or gun slows time by 25%. That's a cool idea. I love that. I always love a good slowdown shot. It feels so badass and also means you don't miss, which is just incredibly frustrating. So not a lot of fighter abilities to look at, unfortunately. Sorry for those of you who are looking forward to it. I did try to go onto the Avowed subreddit to see if those abilities are listed elsewhere, but it seems to be having some issues loading, so I don't have them available right now. There is usually a collection of images that I find on one of the posts by K4F4R4? K4F4R4. Anyways, they had a post where they had a collection of images, and for some reason it's just not loading right now when I'm wanting to look at it, so that's okay. Go ahead and check that out. Items, attributes, and ability screenshots from extended showcase. Perhaps there's just something going on with my PC right now. Anyways, so there are some abilities that we learned on from previous episodes, but I'm not going to dive into those here. We've already been going on for more than long enough on a lot of this stuff. Returning back to the gameplay demo out of the pause menu, there are a few other things that we see used. For example, there are the sigils that kind of look like shields. Those are apparently godless sigils, and they usually indicate some level of a puzzle that's around. In the gameplay demo, we saw the puzzle was resolved by looking for an electrical panel or a switch that you can either shock with magic or throw an item called an electric seed lily at, which is like a shock grenade for non-fantasy terms. And this unlocks the sigil, thereby allowing you into optional areas to get loot like they do in the demo. Now, I do like this mechanic of having these optional areas to explore. I am a little concerned that this might get a bit cumbersome after a while of like exploring ruins and then finding a sigil. I don't know if a lot of people after several hours of playing the game will be like, okay, I gotta find more switches. I mean, I trust Obsidian. They come up with some pretty engaging stuff, so I'm sure they have more up their sleeve, but I don't really know, right? So that's just something that popped in my head. Getting a preview of the ability wheel in the game, we see that there are some things we can access right away. We see, for example, I'm looking at two icons that are leading to subcategories. One is throwables and one is food or health. So it seems like if you have certain things in your inventory, you can access them through the radial menu, but you'll have to go to sub-radial menus by doing that. There are a couple, not a whole bunch, but there are a couple of abilities in the form of spells on this wheel, so perhaps you can customize which abilities you want to have access to on your radial menu versus your quick action ones. There also seems to be options to select a health potion and an essence potion, but they're full right now, so they don't have access to them. But there's also, I'm noticing, 3 companion abilities on this wheel on one side. So the top right-hand side is associated with the companion Kai. The top left-hand side of this radial menu is empty because there isn't a second companion. So it looks like you can have 3 companion abilities at the go on your radial menu at any given time. So I don't know how much of this is customizable, but I think they have more than 3 abilities per companion in the long run of the game, but it looks like you can only have 3 on. I don't know. That's just me speculating. But one of the things looks like an interact button, and we do see that used when the player uses Kai to get through a wall of webs. Basically, there's an interact button you access through the radial menu, tells Kai, go get rid of these webs, and he uses his fire ability to do so. One interesting thing for me, just watching the gameplay footage, both of the Obsidian demo and the B-roll that Microsoft has put out, is that there are a lot of things that you can see that you can very easily miss, such as like the electric lily seed plant that you can drop in combat into the puddle of water to damage enemies. But more importantly, for me anyways, is I am seeing highlighted books everywhere. Like there's so many books lying around that you could just pick up and read. I'm really interested in knowing what a lot of these say. So pay attention to your surroundings when playing the game. The stealth mechanic in the game seems to be pretty straightforward. You can go crouch in high grass to not be seen. When you are in an area where you can be seen, it looks like enemies will have an inverted triangle above their heads that will slowly fill with color yellow, basically. And it looks like once they get to a more alerted state, it turns red and flashes before they are fully aware of you. So pretty straightforward stealth mechanic. The demo also showed that it really rewards exploration in the game. Like, for instance, when you find in this side quest the expedition, you really find them as a result of actually taking the time to go and explore a little nook and cranny at one point in the map. There is obviously, in this case, a hint on your mini-map on your screen to help you find these things because it is important for the quest. But still, like, if that mini-map wasn't there or you turn it off, you could have very easily missed this little place where you would find the expedition that you're here to locate as part of the side quest, which reveals some really interesting information, also gives you the quest item of Jada's journal. So I'm really excited that Obsidian is not only hiding some stuff, but like really rewarding that exploration side of things. And it's also really good to see them rewarding characters who are not only into exploration, but also building their character up in the dialogue options. We see multiple situations where, especially we're talking with Sargamas or even Kai, where you can use either your attribute scores, such as your intellect, or your background to select unique dialogue options. And I remember hearing as well in one of the podcasts that they actually limited some of the options that you saw in this gameplay demo. Like they got rid of some options. So apparently there's even more than the ones we're seeing. And we see quite a lot. Like it's from even having a high enough intellect that you can deduce who killed the expedition that you were searching for. You find them dead. And I just love that there's also a lot of question-based options in a lot of dialogue where you can just explore the lore and talk with your characters or your NPCs. Like, I love Obsidian for that. They do a great job of that. And not only that, but also even having, like, weird options within dialogue itself. Like, for instance, when you're back at Sargamas talking with him, and he's like, I want you to put this relic into the statue that will call the god forth, and then he needs something to power it up. You actually have the chance in dialogue to be like, well, use my soul to power this thing. I know, which I'm guessing summarily kills you as a result. But still, it's cool to see funny-ass options like that in the game itself. And there's even options to ask your companions what they think you should do in situations, which I'll be interested in hearing that. I'll always select it just to get the flavor of it. Or even just follow-up questions, like when you're talking with Sargamas, at one point you can ask, what will happen to you if your god abandons his domain in the beyond? Right? Like, it's such an interesting question to ask. So, I don't know. I love the writing Obsidian. I could talk about it all day. I'm sorry. I'm going on a tangent on dialogue options here. So some of you out there will appreciate it. Some of you might not. I apologize to those who didn't. For those who liked it, you're welcome, fellow nerds. One thing I do want to mention that seems interesting, though, in talking with Sargamas, and this is something that I think will get explored a lot in Avowed, because they've already hinted at it a couple times, is that Sargamas mentions that he hasn't seen a lot of other godlike around. He refers to you as his cousin, not his brother, his cousin, because you're a different kind of godlike. But he hints to the idea that there's not a lot of godlike around, and they've mentioned that in previous interviews. So the godlike are kind of dwindling, and I do believe I know the reasons why, but it'll be interesting to see how they explore that in Avowed. For those curious, it does have to do with some stuff that happens in the second Pillars game. So if you're interested in playing Deadfire or watching a Let's Play of it, then I highly suggest doing that if you want to learn more. I don't want to spoil anything here, though, because that has nothing to do with what we're talking about today. The last and final thing I'll mention is at the very end of this gameplay demo that Obsidian did in the fight against Sargamas. You do have an option to piss him off and fight him. Is that I noticed that, well, one, it's pretty typical. When you get hurt, the screen gets more and more red, obviously. But there's this one point where Sargamas actually hits you with a status, right? Like he does something to debuff you, and you get the thing that flashes on your screen that says incapacitated, and your screen has red peripherals, like you're severely damaged. And so it seems like enemies can hit you in such a way that you will also have negative status attributed to. In this case, you're incapacitated by something that Sargamas did. So it's not a big deal, but it's cool to see little things like this included in combat, so that you can think about how you're going to strategize and stuff like that. Because it does turn out that, according to other people anyways, that the combat in this game is actually quite difficult, or challenging, I guess is the right word to use. And I guess I did lie, there was one last thing I wanted to say. I noticed in the inventory screen, this won't be long, is that the grimoire that you're carrying is called Beothel's grimoire, so it sounds like you can pick up other people's grimoire and use their spells, or even possibly customize their grimoire. I'm guessing as well, certain grimoires, like I mentioned, have certain statistical boosts to them, like they might make you stronger with certain kind of magic or whatnot. So it's something to think about. Anyways, let's move on from the gameplay demo into the rest of the stuff that we have learned recently, just a whole bunch of stuff.
Is an oath worth the weight of a crown?
So the last things that I want to mention before kind of closing out this episode, after the gameplay demo, the only other thing I noticed worth looking at was Bruce Green's demo. Now, he didn't actually get to upload his gameplay footage, but he is a Twitch streamer who, someone posted this on Reddit, who uploaded the videos that Microsoft sent out to reviewers, for example, and he did a commentary of his experience on the game with it. It goes through all three of them, so it's roughly an hour and a half long if you have the time for it. I just kind of listened to it as I was doing my job, and I learned some interesting things in there as well from the comments section. For instance, you can actually hear your character, the envoy, uttering incantations and phrases as they're performing magical spells. So up to now, we've only seen them like pull the spell out and throw it at people, but it turns out you're actually uttering phrases and incantations to help cast those spells, which is a neat little flavor thing that I like. So check that out if you're interested at all. Some other stuff that I'm not going to cover, but I'm just going to mention here. NVIDIA recently did a post, or they put out a trailer showing off their DLSS, stuff that I won't ever really have access to. Avowed was one of them, so if you want to see what Avowed looks like with RTX on or off, you can do that. And lastly, I just want to point out some interesting things that are on the Avowed subreddit at the time of this recording. As I previously stated, while I've been recording this, people have been writing things up and posting them, and there's already other things that I could cover. I'm not going to, because this episode's gone on long enough, but I'm just going to kind of point it to you if you haven't already looked at, and I'll mention anything if it's also worth mentioning. There has been a article put out by Kotaku called Obsidian's Blockbuster Avowed feels like a perfect combination of first-person and classic RPG. I really liked reading that one. The person there really gave a lot of praise, and they pointed out a lot of things that I think were worth looking at, especially if you're really into the game, you want to see other people's opinions and experiences. That's definitely a good one to read. There's one I haven't read yet by WindowsCentral.com called Playing Avowed for the First Time While Discussing the Delay, Xbox Performance, and Ray Tracing with the Developers. So this actually sounds like there's a talk with the developers going on there. One from GameReactor.eu about the combat and how it's kind of like Skyrim, which is funny because other articles have said it doesn't feel like Skyrim, or that the comparison is not the best one to have. And lastly, one from Polygon.com saying Avowed feels like a fun fantasy spin-off for fans of the Outer Worlds, which is, I think, not unmerited, definitely. There's definitely some Outer Worlds influence in the game design, you can tell, but you can also tell that they've kicked it up a notch since having that first-person game that's a little more action-focused, that they learned a lot of lessons from the Outer Worlds. I'm just going to quickly click on the Windows Central one and do a quick skim to see if there's something in there that I think you need to know. Otherwise, we're going to start closing out the episode. Okay, so I read the article, and there are actually a couple of things worth mentioning here. So sorry if this is going long enough. Like I said at the beginning, hopefully you've broken this up into chunks by now. But there are some things on this article that I do actually want to mention. One is that this person who wrote the article actually got to play the bonus 4th build for a character that no one else got to really play. So for a little context, at the demo that people got to walk in and play, you could either play a mage, a barbarian, or a ranger of some sort. But there was a fourth character build that they had made, and actually they utilized for the Obsidian hands-on demo, and that was a blood mage. A blood mage is focused around the idea of like sacrificing some of your health. I've already mentioned this with the ability to be able to cast more spells. Now, this isn't something you select at character creation. This is just kind of the name we're giving to a build that you can create yourself as you level up your character. But apparently you become just like a monster for slinging spells. Like you get so much more spells you can fire off, but at the cost, obviously, of your own health. So that was pretty cool to read about his experience doing that. But for me, I found some other things worth mentioning later on in this article. For instance, Avowed's only restriction is that you'll never have enough XP to unlock every ability, forcing you to commit to a unique playstyle, but that doesn't mean you're locked to one build. So this isn't anything mind-blowing, but it does sound like, yeah, you're not going to be able to have every ability. And we kind of already knew this. You can respec those, so don't feel like you're truly missing out. If you're like, man, I really wish I had tried this one thing out, you can just make a save file, quickly respec, test it out, see if it was worth keeping or not, and then choose which save file to keep from there on, right? Like, so that option is there for you, and I really like that Obsidian is being player-focused in that way. As well, Obsidian confirmed that Avowed won't have any New Game Plus option at launch to carry your progress into further replays, even though, and he mentions this here, that Avowed is designed in a way that is highly replayable. So no New Game Plus option. I've never really cared too much about New Game Plus. I'm personally hoping for like a supernova mode kind of thing like they had in the Outer Worlds, because that addition of really having to monitor your food and drink and rest and all that kind of thing, and only saving at certain increments and not being able to fast travel, that really changed the game for me in a lot of ways. And I know I could impose those restrictions upon myself, and I might, but it's always way more, I think, rewarding to have the game force you to do it. Maybe because I feel like I actually beat the game's challenge in a sense, like I actually overcame what the game tried to do to me, rather than just me imposing a restriction on myself. It doesn't feel as satisfying, because maybe it wasn't as hard, I don't know. Anyways, so that's something I wanted to quickly mention, because those seemed interesting enough, and some people might want to know that. They also take the time to explore the idea of the 30 frames per second discussion that's going on with Avowed. Apparently, and I kind of had a hint to this when I was watching him mention on the podcast, they're aiming for a 30 frames per second minimum, but there's nothing set in stone yet. Apparently, the technical side of games are the last thing that you do, and with these last few months of polish, there's no telling what they could obviously come up with. So it doesn't sound like we're being locked at 30 frames, it's just we're aiming for that minimum. It's definitely not outside the realm of reasonability to think that they will be locked at 30 frames on console. So I think I might have misspoke earlier in this episode today. Sorry about that. But so we might not be locked. I definitely think that's a possibility. Other games have chosen that so that it's just a stable experience for the entire game. But who knows? Maybe Obsidian will decide that it can actually have a range of things. Maybe they'll lock it at 45. I don't know if something like that's possible. But yeah, I think that the comment that they made on the podcast where they mentioned the 30 frames was just about the idea of like, we have certain priorities that we have for it being an Obsidian game, and frame rates might not necessarily fit into that. That's my interpretation. That's not me quoting them or anything. That's just kind of the vibe I'm getting. But they've also mentioned how like the game is running really, really well, and that they're just kind of, those are the fine-tuning things that they'll do at the end. They're also trying to include ray tracing stuff, not just on PC, but also on console as well. But apparently ray tracing, and I didn't know this, there's a lot of components to ray tracing. There's different categories of ray tracing or things within it that you can actually consider, and you can enable certain options within ray tracing and certain options that you don't want to take. So they're kind of fiddling around with that right now, I imagine. So that's kind of where they're at with all of that. So that's a little bit hopeful for me, especially seeing the whole conversation of people be disappointed with it, that they might not hit 60 frames, but perhaps it'll be a little higher than we think, or it won't be locked to 30, and that there'll be a lot of really good graphical fidelity as well as smoothness of play. It seems like it's running really well, and I'm excited to hear that. They also talk briefly about accessibility, and that there is a lot of accessibility features, but there's obviously still stuff that they want to include as they continue developing. They unfortunately don't mention anything specific other than third person, which we already know is confirmed, being an option in the game as an accessibility feature, because there are some people, like due to motion sickness, that they can't play in first person. And lastly, one interesting thing that I noticed when they were talking about the delay for Avowed is that Matt Hansen, I think that's the guy he was talking to, refers to our friends at Xbox kind of like letting them delay the game. So it makes me wonder if actually Obsidian wanted their game to be delayed. Like maybe Xbox was like, hey, we have too many games coming out on Game Pass, we need to delay one. Perhaps Obsidian, maybe they initiated the conversation, or maybe they stepped up first being like, hey, we'd love more time. The game's done, but we would love to do some more stuff. Who knows? Interesting kind of perspective I hadn't considered at this point yet. So yeah, it's good to see that they're really happy about having the extra time to not just squash bugs, as they say, but also just do other development on features that they wanted to include in the game, but they just didn't have time to implement before it shipped out, add more accessibility features in, and you just add some more things in. So it's more than just squashing bugs and making things prettier, I guess. It's also like adding other features. And the article kind of finishes off saying that like Watchdog Legions had a kind of a similar thing where they had extra time due to a delay, and that added the entire play as any NPC feature that was like really kind of a selling feature for that game. I don't know if it's quite good to compare Watchdog Legions with Avowed, but I never really played Watchdog Legions, so I only have other people's opinions to go about it. Anyways, dear Lord, that is it. That is everything. My tongue is like swelled up from all this talking that I've been doing, which I don't know. Maybe that's something else. Okay, so let's land this plane. Let's close it out. Normally I would ask on any episode, what does this have to do with Avowed? But this is all about Avowed, baby, so nothing to ask there. I'm just going to quickly close out before I mention what I've been playing, is like, I am super hyped about Avowed. I don't know about you guys, like, this is a lot of stuff to chew through, but I read all of these articles except for the most recent ones I just mentioned, and it was so cool to see people's different takes on it, people who have seen the world of Eora versus haven't, and people who are excited now to explore the world of Eora, which I know I'm most excited about. Like, I get to be in this world again, and that's super awesome for nerds like me. But also, it seems like the gameplay is going to be really fun, both from a roleplay perspective, a character building perspective, a combat perspective. Like, it seems like there's a lot put in this game. There's been so many remarks by reviewers and people who got to play hands-on that the game is beautiful to look at, but it also plays really well and is actually engaging and fun, and it respects players' time and energy really well, like how you build your characters and what you have access to early on and how you can respect things. And so it seems like Avowed is a really well thought out game. I don't know if I want to say that this game's best quality so far is that it is thoughtful, because that makes it sound like it's just considerate or something like that. But I mean thoughtful in the sense of like, it really seems like Obsidian went out of their way to design this game in a way that was like thought out fully and like thought out logically and thought out experientially. Like, is it going to be fun? Is it going to like play? And is it great? You know, like all these good fundamental questions you should ask when building a game outside of like, does it have this feature or that feature? Is like, is it fun to play? Does it respect the player? Does it deliver on this experience? And I'm super hyped for it. So I don't know about you guys. I mean, here I am ranting for roughly 2 hours at this point on a game just on some news that we saw. That's it, everyone. Thanks for holding in there for this long episode. As I mentioned at the very beginning, there's no episode next week. Not because like I can't do another one. I very easily probably could, but I recognize that this is way longer than what a lot of people have. And so for those of you who need to budget podcasting time, I'm doing that for you as well, though. Like, it will be nice for me to take that week and spend more time with my family. My wife is about to re-enter into the workforce again, not because she was laid off or anything, but she works in the education industry. So summertime, she gets off and she's about to go back in. So it'll be good to spend that time that I would normally be researching or recording and spend it with her instead as she kind of goes back into it again. Nothing to report in terms of what I've been playing that's brand new. Although, funny little tiny anecdote, I started up a playthrough of Mass Effect just because on the off chance Mass Effect 4 includes a character save import from the Legendary Edition, I want to have one done and ready. And if they don't, then whatever, I played Mass Effect, so that's fun. Anyways, my son has been like coming in and jumping on my lap while I'm playing Mass Effect, and I've been teaching him all of the alien species, which has been hilarious because we'll be playing the game and he'll be like, "Daddy, that's a Krogan," or "Oh, that's an L-Core." He really likes the L-Cores, which is great because that's actually my favorite in the Mass Effect series of the L-Cores. I think they're hilarious. But anyway, so that's been what I've been playing recently. Other than a couple of other small games just here or there, I really haven't been gaming a lot. That's just been my plink away at it when I have time games. So who knows, maybe I'll get into something one of these days. But for now, I'm just going to plink away at Mass Effect and mostly just watch anime with my wife while she's into it. So I think Delicious in Dungeons is the one we're currently watching. Seems fun so far, so we'll see where it goes. Anyways, that's everything I need to say. Anyone who's listened all the way through, thank you so much. If you have a comment, something you want to add about all the news coming out, if you have anything about the game that you really want to share, send me an email, worldofaora@gmail.com. As well, you can ask questions. If there's anything you want said on the show, if you have your own review to give, your own thoughts to give, you can even record stuff and email it to me. I'll put it in the show happily. So if anyone wants to do that, go ahead, worldofaora@gmail.com. You can follow me on Twitter @worldofaora. I mostly just post updates when the show is out, but I also will requote tweets that I think are important for you to have. And lastly, if you would like to support the show, if you've been a long-time listener or whatnot, you can do so at ko-fi.com/worldofaora. Thanks everyone so much for slogging through this long episode about all the Gamescom and related news. Thankfully, we can put a cap on it now and say we're done. I know that was a bit much, and it was a weird approach for it, but whatever. It's done now, so it is what it is. Thanks, everyone, for listening. I'm your host, Eric A.K. Gingerino, and I'll see you guys next time.